Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, often called the two housing giants, hold the fate of millions of American homeowners in their hands. And now they are facing the biggest real estate shakeup since the 2008 housing collapse, Trump's plan to privatize them by the end of the year. Some of our friends are saying this is Trump fulfilling his promise to make housing affordable for the average person. But others are warning that this could trigger a repeat of the 2008 housing crisis, dealing a devastating blow to the American real estate market. Today, we're going to use the 5 most pressing questions from our viewers to break down this major event in U.S. real estate. What did Fannie and Freddie do that led to the 2008 crash? Why is Trump so insistent on privatizing them before the end of the year? Will this cause mortgage rates to plummet? Could it trigger another housing collapse? And with the U.S. considering introducing cryptocurrency into real estate, what new risks does this pose for home buyers and investors? I've been on a business trip on the East Coast for the past 2 weeks, so let's talk as we go. Before we start, please give this video a thumbs up. Your support is my biggest motivation to keep creating content. Alright, let's tackle the first question. What did Fannie and Freddie do that led to the 2008 housing collapse? Many people support the theory that the two giants were actually scapegoats, which is why the government bailed them out in the first place. We can understand it this way. Starting in the 1990s, the U.S. government, specifically Congress and the Department of Housing and Urban Development, established affordable housing goals. The government wanted to help people solve their housing problems. To do this, they required Fannie and Freddie to buy more mortgages from low-income families to help them afford homes. By the mid-2000s, the proportion of these low-income mortgages on their books had grown higher and higher, eventually exceeding 50%. This is how the subprime mortgage crisis was born. Subprime means lower-tier risky loans. In normal, financially stable times when housing prices were still rising, these bad loans weren't very noticeable. But the snowball of bad debt kept getting bigger and bigger, and eventually crushed Fannie and Freddie. In September 2008, the two giants were taken over by the government, marking one of the largest financial rescues in U.S. history. That year, millions of Americans lost their homes overnight, and housing prices in many cities were cut in half. The entire global financial system was dragged down by the subprime crisis. So, when people say Fannie and Freddie were scapegoats, there might be some truth to it, given this history. This is why today, when there's talk of a new round of government-led reform for the two giants, many people's first reaction is, the government is getting involved again. Are we going to see a repeat of the 2008 housing collapse? Now for the second question. Why is Trump so insistent on privatizing Fannie and Freddie before the end of the year? When the 2008 financial crisis erupted, Fannie and Freddie's books were so deep in the red that they were on the verge of taking down the entire U.S. housing market. Since real estate is the lifeblood of the national economy, if the housing market collapsed, the economy would be finished. So, the government had no choice but to step in and take control. That rescue has now lasted 16 years, during which Fannie and Freddie have operated as quasi-state-owned enterprises. With the U.S. government backing them, global investors saw them as a relatively safe bet and were willing to continue buying the mortgage-backed securities they packaged. So after 16 years, why the rush to privatize them before the end of this year? There are many reasons, but let's summarize 3. Feel free to add more. First, from Trump's perspective, he wants to reduce the deficit. By selling the government's shares in Fannie and Freddie, it could cash out an estimated $30 billion from the market in one go. This money could be used to fill the budget deficit, which he has always promised to cut. Second, it's about fulfilling a promise. Since taking office, Trump has consistently advocated for less government intervention, especially in real estate finance. If he can deliver on this promise by the end of his first year, it would be a significant achievement to put on his report card. Third, it's a move for capital interests. This privatization will bring in more private investors. This not only allows Fannie and Freddie to secure more financing, But more importantly, it allows the large shareholders and investors who get in early to make a profit. And these are certainly not small retail investors. So, for these three reasons, this move is being rushed before the end of the year. For the average person, at least from the stock market's perspective, the shares of Fannie and Freddie soared by 20% on the day of the announcement. The capital investors profited immediately. For these investors, it doesn't matter if Fannie and Freddie are state-owned, private, government-run, or publicly traded. What matters is that when the stock soars, there's money to be made. As for future mortgage rates, changes in housing prices, or the difficulty of buying a home, the vested capital interests don't really care. That was never their purpose for getting involved with the two housing giants in the first place. This is why some say privatization is a good thing, pointing to the soaring stock prices. But others worry it's a disaster because the winners and losers in this game are two completely different groups of people. The losers might end up losing their homes, while the winners will continue to prove the classic Matthew effect. The rich get richer. That said, the average homebuyer doesn't really care about competing with Wall Street for who makes more money. What they care about most right now is not a housing price collapse, but simply whether interest rates will come down even a little in the second half of the year. Let's move on to the third question. Will this cause mortgage rates to plummet? Let me start with the conclusion. The privatization of Fannie and Freddie alone will not necessarily lower mortgage rates. In fact, in the short term, rates might not move at all, or could even rise a little. So don't count on a rate crash by the end of the year. Why is there this speculation? The current relationship between the two housing giants and the US government is a bit like a son and his father. You can imagine the subtle, unspoken understanding there. Fannie and Freddie have the government's credit as an implicit guarantee. When the son wants to borrow money, he has his dad's backing. It's like a young entrepreneur trying to get a loan. As a young person, they have no collateral. But if they have a wealthy family and a father willing to co-sign, the bank is more likely to lend them money, and the interest rate might be a little lower. Once Fannie and Freddie are privatized, the market will worry about whether this government guarantee will still exist. They will have to reassess. Will the US government continue to unconditionally bail them out with taxpayer money as it has in the past? If capital investors perceive the market risk to be high, meaning the two giants no longer have a safety net, they will demand a higher return, which means higher interest rates. The higher the risk, the greater the required return. As for the September interest rate cut, that has even less to do with the privatization. Rate cuts are primarily driven by economic data. Remember two key figures, inflation and the unemployment rate. If the unemployment rate suddenly spikes above 5%, a benchmark we've discussed before, the Federal Reserve might have to cut rates to stimulate the economy. In that case, mortgage rates might follow suit and drop a bit. So the privatization of Fannie and Freddie is just one small factor affecting interest rates. The real force driving rates down is the overall economic environment, especially the employment and inflation data. You should pay close attention to the latest jobs report. To sum it up for the average person, if you're planning to buy a house, you don't need to wait for the privatization to see how rates change. Just keep an eye on the economic data. Also, watch the latest personnel changes at the Federal Reserve. It seems Fed Chair Jerome Powell's job is getting harder and harder, with many trying to undermine him. If a new chairperson is appointed, the market could face a new storm of uncertainty. Everyone will be watching and waiting to see what the new leader's policies will be. Pay close attention to these developments at the Fed. The critical moment may not be far off. This next question was the most frequently asked and debated. Will this cause another housing crash? For most people, the moment they hear about reforms to Fannie and Freddie, their first reaction is, it's over, the housing market is going to crash again. This is because the memory of the 2008 collapse is so deeply ingrained. The lesson from that crisis was that when lending standards are loosened to the point where anyone can get a loan, regardless of their credit history, and housing prices are pushed to the ceiling, a bubble burst is only a matter of time. So this privatization has many people worried. If Fannie and Freddie, in their pursuit of profit, start issuing more high-risk loans again, could it lead to another crash? However, regarding the question of an immediate housing collapse, I think crises don't happen in an instant. They are the result of a long accumulation process. So you shouldn't expect housing price to suddenly get cut in half by the end of the year. That's just not realistic. Furthermore, there's a view that the situation today is completely different from 2008. Lending standards have been tightened significantly. Banks and the two housing giants are much stricter in vetting borrowers' income and credit. The era of zero-down loans and getting a house for free is likely gone for good. The risk is just too high, and even Wall Street isn't willing to play that game anymore. It's not sustainable. Second, regulators now conduct annual stress tests on financial institutions. They have to prove that they have the capacity to withstand economic downturns. They can't just chase loan volume and commissions like they used to. As greedy as Wall Street may be, they are averse to systemic risk, a total collapse of the system that would cause everyone to go down with the housing market. The financial system simply can't handle that level of risk. For us ordinary people, the biggest risk is actually liquidity. If market confidence falls, liquidity dries up. What does that mean? It means your mortgage might become harder and harder to get approved. So, even if housing prices fall, you might not be able to get a loan to buy a house. This creates a situation where, even with lower prices, people who need a mortgage still can't compete with all cash buyers. As you know, desirable homes in good locations are still being snatched up with all cash offers, and not just one at a time, but 2, 3, or 4 at once. This could still happen, and for the average person, the dream of home ownership would remain out of reach. So the privatization itself won't cause an immediate collapse, but it could make the market more vulnerable to economic shocks. This vulnerability is also evident in a new development that some of you have already noticed. The way we buy homes might be about to change in a way we've never seen before. That is the potential introduction of cryptocurrency into the real estate market. And that would be a huge change. All right, our final question. The US is considering introducing cryptocurrency into real estate. What new risks does this pose for homebuyers and investors? This was the question that I found most intriguing. I suspect the viewer who asked it might be a crypto expert themselves. They likely saw that the Federal Housing Finance Agency has already asked Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae to study the possibility of accepting cryptocurrency as an asset for loan applications. It hasn't been implemented yet, but the leadership has tasked them with exploring its feasibility. My understanding is this: adding cryptocurrency to the mortgage process is like adding a new type of fuel to a gasoline car. Sure, this new tech might make it run faster, but if the fuel is unstable, the car not only won't run fast, it might even become a safety hazard and spin out of control. For example, if a person holds Bitcoin or Ethereum in the future, banks might recognize it as an asset, which could boost their mortgage application. This would make it easier to get a loan approved, and maybe even for a larger amount. The benefit is obvious. For many young people, they may not have much cash saved up. We all know how hard it is for young people to buy a house now. Housing prices have multiplied many times over, but their salaries are often less than what their parents earned, so they can't save much cash. But to improve their financial situation quickly, young people might turn to the crypto world and make a profit. In the past, these assets couldn't be easily used to buy a house. But if these assets could be directly counted towards a down payment, once the policy is relaxed, you might be able to close a gap of a few tens of thousands or even $100,000 with a single Bitcoin. This would significantly lower the barrier to entry for a down payment. For young crypto enthusiasts, the American dream could become a reality overnight. But what's the problem? The price of cryptocurrency is far less stable than housing prices. Yes, housing prices go up and down, but the fluctuations in the crypto market are a roller coaster. A 10% gain one day and a 20% loss the next is not uncommon. So imagine you use $100,000 worth of cryptocurrency as a down payment. 6 months later, the market corrects and it's only worth $70,000 or $80,000. who covers that $20,000 to $30,000 shortfall? The bank, the lender, or the home buyer? This is why, even if crypto assets are integrated into the mortgage system, I doubt that banks and the two housing giants would recognize them at 100% of their market value. They would likely have to apply a discount. For example, if your crypto is worth $100, they might only value it at $60 or even $50. You would still have to make up the other 50% with proof of income, reserve funds, or a cosigner. And there's an even bigger risk here. Once this policy is enacted, it could incentivize some people, especially young people, to gamble. They might see someone who speculated on a certain coin and was able to buy a house and feel left behind. To buy a house, they might also start gambling in the crypto market. A financially conservative person who would normally just buy stocks or index funds might now, in hopes of making a quick buck, start playing with cryptocurrencies, hoping for a short-term surge to cover their down payment. They could end up investing heavily in crypto. This makes them vulnerable to being manipulated in a scheme. The cycle of being harvested like a leek in the crypto world is endless. They might not end up with a house, and the little savings they had could be completely lost to the crypto market. So, while introducing cryptocurrency into the mortgage system could certainly help some people in the short term, especially young buyers who have crypto assets but little cash and who have a lot of experience and risk awareness in the crypto world, it could also introduce more instability into the mortgage market. If the price of cryptocurrency plummets, it could cause a chain reaction of loan defaults from people who were harvested in the crypto market. It could even cause a crypto novice to lose both their money and their house, which would then be foreclosed on by the bank. This privatization of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac is seen by some as fixing a loophole in the mortgage system and making the market more efficient. Others say it's turning back the clock on the mortgage safety net to 2008, increasing the risk of a housing collapse. What we can be sure of is that if this plan goes through, it will truly change the rules of American real estate, and the effects will last for many years. So, whether you're preparing to buy a house or are already paying off a mortgage, you need to keep a close eye on the privatization of the two housing giants and the personnel changes at the Federal Reserve in the coming months. Because this isn't just a game for Wall Street, it concerns the risks in the investment market, the volatility of housing prices, and the adjustment of loan interest rates. Finally, I welcome you to share your valuable insights on the privatization of Fannie and Freddie and your thoughts on integrating cryptocurrency into real estate. Thank you for your likes and subscriptions, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next exciting share.